afternoon. I'm Catherine Bassett here in New Jersey. I'm taking part in this incredible project started by Kareem Neal, wonderful educator from Arizona, who this week has challenged us to do some research and some learning around protests. I started out asking Kareem if it would be okay if I focused on the Children's March in Birmingham in 1963, and he said yes. And I started down that road. But I veered, as you often do when you're taking a journey. And I ended up focusing on the story of Lynda Blackmon Lowery, who was the youngest person to take part in the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. And Lynda's story is absolutely amazing. I would like to share a screen from NPR with you in which she was interviewed. By NPR about her participation in the marches, because she participated in multiple marches, and specifically her participation in the March on Bloody Sunday in 1965. I am going to share with you some information from a book for young adults, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, which was written by Ms. Lowery in participation with two other authors. But I wanted to share this NPR site first, and I wanted to share in particular the last paragraph that's on this page. And I'm hoping that if I move away my Zoom bar, you'll be able to see the website in case you wanted to write it down. And what she's saying, she took part in numerous marches, and we'll read about that in a few minutes in the book. But here she is specifically talking about what happened on the march from Selma to Montgomery. And she says, I was 14. I wasn't a threat to anybody. There was really about 3,200 people that left Selma on the march that day, but only about 300 were allowed to walk all the way from Selma to Montgomery, and I was among that 300. I was terrified, but I also knew that if I did not embrace this fear or take this fear, it would one day own me. Those words are so incredibly powerful, and I wanted to share them with you. And I wanted you to think about them as we read a little bit about her story. This is the cover of the book, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. It is illustrated, it is written for young adults. The illustrations are not like illustrations in a book that's written for young children, but there are illustrations, and some of them are extremely powerful. I'm not going to share them with you, but I'm hoping that you're going to get hold of this book and read it for yourselves. By the time that I was 15 years old, I had been in jail 9 times. I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1950. In those days, you were born black or you were born white in Selma, and there was a big difference. Where I lived, everyone was black. I lived in the George Washington Carver homes. My buddies and I all felt safe there because everybody watched out for one another. If one family couldn't pay the rent, the others had car parties and fish fries to raise money. Nobody talked about it afterwards because the next month it might be you. We went to black churches and we went to black schools where we had caring black teachers. I looked forward to going to school. The Ku Klux Klan stayed away from us. I felt safe and secure. We were poor then, but I never knew it. I can't remember a day in my life when I went hungry. And even after my mother died when I was 7 years old, my daddy made sure of that. I loved the ground my daddy walked on. When different family members wanted to take us to live with them after Mama died, Daddy said he wasn't separating his kids. He would take care of us. I was the oldest of four. Jackie was next, then Joanne, and then the baby, Al. It was my grandmother who first took me to hear Dr. King. That's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that was back in 1963 when I was just 13 years old. The church was packed. When Dr. King began to speak, everyone got real quiet. The way he sounded just made you want to do what he was talking about. And he was talking about voting, the right to vote, and what it would take for our parents to get it. He was talking about nonviolence and how you could persuade people to do things your way with steady, loving confrontation. And I will never forget those words, steady, loving confrontation, and the way that he said them. We children didn't really understand what he was talking about, but we wanted to do what he was saying. "Who is with me?" Dr. King asked, and all of us stood up clapping. And by the time we left that meeting, Dr. King had a commitment from me and everyone else in that church to do whatever it would take, nonviolently, to get the right to vote. At that time, I was already in the civil rights movement. I was mostly following the high school kids around. They said I couldn't take part in these sit-ins that they were holding because I was too young, but I had a job anyway. My job was to go for help. I was called the gopher because I always had to go for someone's mama when someone got took to jail. That all changed on January 2nd, 1965. That's when Dr. King came back to Selma for a big meeting at Brown Chapel. We called it Emancipation Day because it was all about freedom. There were about 700 people there, and I was one of them. It was an awesome thing, a fearsome thing to see so many people. They came from all around, and they had to travel some dangerous roads to get to Selma, little country roads where the Ku Klux Klan were riding around. When Dr. King walked in, everyone stood and cheered. He talked about the vote and how we would get it, and he told us that we must be ready to march. His voice grew louder as he continued. He said, "We must be ready to go to jail by the thousands." And by the end, he shouted, "Our cry is a simple one. Give us the ballot." To tell you the truth, I just felt that once our parents got the right to vote, everything would be a whole lot better. There's power in a vote. For years, Black people tried to register to vote, but they were mostly just turned away. You see, whenever a Black person tried to register, someone would take a picture and then show it to that person's boss. And white people could fire Black people whenever and however they wanted. And that's why civil rights leaders needed us children to march. After Dr. King's speech, our local leaders planned 2 or 3 marches for us every day. They would say, "We're going to march to the courthouse tomorrow. If you're with us, come to Brown Chapel at 9 o'clock. The very first time I heard that, I said, "I'm going to march." 2 or 3 times a day, a group of us students would leave Brown Chapel heading downtown. I don't think we were ever fewer than about 50 kids in a march. And before we left, the adults would tell us, "You're going to jail. Do not fight back. You might be pushed. You might be hit. Turn the other cheek. Do not fight back. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of you." Most of the time, once we got downtown, the police would let us march for 4 or 5 blocks. Then they would march us right onto a yellow school bus. And if you didn't get on the school bus fast enough, the police would shock you with a cattle prod. Tasers is what they're called now. At first, they would take us to the old National Guard Armory, where we had to stand for hours all packed together or sit on a concrete floor. But after a week or so of that, they started taking us right to jail. The first time I went to jail, I was 14 and I was scared. I didn't know what they were going to do with us. There must have been about 100 boys and girls that time, and all of us girls were packed into one cell meant for 2 people. There were 2 iron beds coming out of the wall, and they didn't have mattresses on them, so they'd be really uncomfortable for the prisoners. Over in one corner there was a sink, and there was a toilet, just a toilet bowl. There was no way to shield yourself from whoever was walking down past the cells, so we shielded each other. After the first time, I wasn't so afraid because I was with my buddies and we knew we had each other's backs. What we would do with each other's backs, I didn't know. Those white policemen had billy clubs and guns, but we had each other, and we figured there was safety in numbers. It helped when we sang, "We shall overcome." Singing those words made us believe we could do it. We could overcome hate and racism. And every time I sang the line, "We are not afraid," I lied a little, but it was important to sing it. Everything about the marches was well organized. The night before, the leaders would say, "We're going to have 3 demonstrations tomorrow. We'll need the first 75 kids here to go out about 9:30. Second march, we're going to send you all out about 12:15. Third march, 3 o'clock. We learned the drill real quick. We went to jail, we came back out, we went to jail again, be it the same day or the next day. Pretty soon, we knew how to pack our own lunches because the jail food wasn't very good. With all that marching and going to jail, we were missing a lot of school, but we planned for that too. There were the ones we called the brains, and while we were marching, they stayed in school. The brains did the homework for the rest of us. They took the tests for us too. Say I left to march, but there was a math test that day. Beatrice Torrey would stay at school and take my test, her test, and somebody else's test. Then during school lunch period, Beatrice would leave for the next march. We had it all figured out, and we were very determined. I'm going to read now from a chapter about the March on Bloody Sunday. When the day came, we set out from Brown Chapel as usual. I was with Jimmy Webb and 15 of my buddies. Jimmy was our group leader. He told us to stick together and to remember, steady, loving confrontation. When we got to the top of Edmund Pettus Bridge, going out of town, all I could see was a sea of white people. And that's when I got nervous. The road was full of white men on foot and on horseback. They were state troopers and there were sheriff deputies. Along the road, there were people sitting, white people, on their cars waving Confederate flags. The deputies were just mean white men. They didn't have uniforms or anything. Our sheriff deputized any white man who might want to bust our heads. The harder you hit, the more popular you were with him. And Sheriff Clark was the meanest of them all. He was a staunch segregationist. He believed that he was white and he was right, and that was it. He hated black men, women, and us black kids too. He hated us all. At first, I tried to tell myself that it would be okay because there were so many of us. Then I saw the state troopers putting on gas masks, and I got really scared. I'd only seen a gas mask on TV, but I knew something dangerous was about to happen. I had never been in a violent situation before. Sure, we'd been hit with billy clubs or a cattle prod, but we'd never really been beaten. Suddenly, it seemed like everything was very different. "Go back to your church. Go home," the white men said. Then Jimmy Webb said, "Let's pray," and we went down on our knees. That was normal. You marched, you stopped, you prayed, you turned around, or you went to jail. So I was on my knees when I heard these sounds, pop, 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 pop. All of a sudden, a cloud of gas was burning my lungs and my eyes. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't see, and it was terrifying. The next thing I knew, I felt a man's hand grab me from behind, pulling me backward. I heard him say that hateful word. Then I bit that hand, And that's when he hit me over my eye. He hit me twice, hard. I was still kneeling, struggling to get up, but he pushed me forward and hit me again, this time in the back of my head. I staggered and ran right into the tear gas, but that white man kept on running after me and hitting me. People were screaming. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I must have fainted because the next thing I knew, I came to on a stretcher and some men were putting me into the back of a hearse. But I wasn't dead, and I was sure not going to let them put me in the back of that hearse. I jumped off the stretcher and started running toward home. I didn't know what I was doing. I just ran. When I got across the bridge, that's when I saw my little sister, Joanne. She had been marching further back. Now she looked like she was dead, lying in a man's arms. I ran to him. He said she had just fainted, so I slapped her on the side of her face, to wake her up. But when Joanne opened her eyes and looked at me, she started screaming. I knew tear gas had messed up my face, but I didn't realize that I was also covered in blood. When one man saw Joanne and me, he said, "This child is bleeding bad. She's got to go to the hospital." I didn't know what he was talking about because Joanne wasn't bleeding, and I didn't know that I was bleeding. They took me to Good Samaritan Hospital, but there were white doctors there. And in my mind, it was not a good day to be around white people. When the doctor sewed up my forehead, I felt every stitch. There were 7 stitches over my eyes and 28 in the back of my head. I didn't know it then, but while I was getting stitched up, people all across the country were watching a special news report on TV. They saw what happened in Selma that day, and the reporters called it Bloody Sunday. I'm going to skip to the end of the book, and I'm going to read Lynda's explanation about why voting rights. 100 years before Bloody Sunday, the United States fought the Civil War over the rights of 3,950,528 Americans. The question was this: were these enslaved men, women, and children with rights guaranteed by the Constitution, or were they property? More than 600,000 soldiers from North and South died to decide that question. The answer came when the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, and the 14th and 15th, which guaranteed rights of citizenship. These rights had been denied us African Americans before: the right to marry, to own property, to be protected by the law, to travel, to go to school, and to vote. Finally, the Constitution said we had these rights and more. But 100 years later, there I was marching and going to jail and getting stitches in my head for a right we had been given long ago: the right to vote. Why? In places like Selma, state laws and procedures made registering to vote easy for white people, but close to impossible for African Americans. First, you filled out a 4-page application. Then, you took an extremely difficult literacy test, which white applicants did not have to take at all. And the registrars, who were all white, could decide whether you failed, even if you knew all the answers. And finally, you had to find a person who was already registered to vouch for you. After that, you waited days or weeks for the registrars to decide, in their opinion, if you were fit to vote. And that's not all. Just for trying to register, your photograph was taken and shown to your employer and your landlord, and you could be fired or evicted just for trying to register. And then your picture was circulated to other employers and landlords, so you couldn't get another job or another home. And that's why my father could not vote. My grandmother could not vote. My teachers could not vote. In 1964, there were 14,400 white citizens and 15,115 Black citizens eligible to vote in our county, more Black than white. But of the 9,530 people registered to vote, 9,195 were white. And that was years after really brave people worked to register African Americans to vote. So it was white voters who elected Governor George Wallace. His slogan was segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. White citizens elected our mayor, Joe Smitherman, another segregationist, and they elected Sheriff Jim Clark, one of the meanest segregationists around. This is why I went to jail and marched for the right to vote. This is why I rejoiced when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, and why the day I turned 21, the voting age back then, I registered to vote. The voting rights movement started in Selma before I was even born. It took tremendous determination to win the right to vote. I was beaten and terrified. Many others were too. 3 people lost their lives in the days before and after Bloody Sunday. They were murdered, and 1 friend disappeared. And she goes on to share their stories. In addition, at the end of the book, there is a reading guide that would be an awesome tool for holding discussion groups around this topic. Lynda Blackmon Lowery is a heroine, an amazing person who wasn't afraid to put her life on the line to make sure that she and her fellow Black citizens had a right that they had been given 100 years earlier, the right to cast a vote without fear. I hope that you will read this book. It's an amazing book, and even though it was written for young adults, there is so much in it that is important for us adults to know and understand today. Thank you for listening.